The pickup had been behind me for 60 miles, and it never once touched the fast lane. My name is Dale. I've been driving long haul for 12 years. Refrigerated loads, mostly produce, dairy, out of a depot in Pittsburgh. I've done enough night miles that the dark stopped bothering me a long time ago. This was a Tuesday in late October. I was westbound on I-76, the Pennsylvania Turnpike, hauling a load of packaged chicken to a distribution center outside Columbus. The kind of run I've done maybe 200 times. I'd left the depot around 10:30. I was aiming to hit the Ohio border by 2 in the morning. The temperature gauge on my dash read 31 degrees. There'd been a frost warning on the radio, and the road surface had that faint gray tint that means you watch your braking distances. Clear night, though, good visibility. The kind of night where you can see headlights a long way back. I noticed them around mile marker 110. Not because they were wrong at first, just two white lights in my driver's side mirror, normal following distance, steady. I glanced and moved on. 15 minutes later they were still there, same gap, same speed. I'd bumped from 68 up to 72 to make time, and the lights had moved with me. I told myself it was a commuter, someone on a long haul like me. Nothing strange about a vehicle sitting in your mirrors on the turnpike at that hour. But around mile 119, I eased off the gas and let the rig bleed down to 61. I wanted to see if they'd pass me. They didn't, they just matched it. I watched for 2 miles. The headlights held the same distance, like we were connected by a rope. That's when I got the first real pull in my gut, not panic, just a quiet wrong feeling. I picked up the CB and ran a quick check on channel 19. I still keep the old uniden on the dash, old habit. I asked if anyone was running westbound on 76 between Somerset and the Ohio line. Static, then a voice came back, gravelly, older driver by the sound of it. Westbound, yeah, just past Donegal. Why, you got trouble? I said I might have a tail and couldn't tell yet. He said, what kind of rig? I told him it wasn't a rig, low headlights, pickup truck maybe. There was a pause. I had something like that 2 weeks ago on Route 30, followed me from Breezewood to Lisbon, never passed, never dropped back, just sat there. He said he'd pulled into a Flying J, and the truck idled at the lot entrance for about 20 minutes before leaving. He never got a plate, couldn't make out the cab. I didn't respond right away. I was watching my mirror. The headlights were still there. I held at 65 and waited for the exit at mile 128, small interchange, State Route 601, nothing up there but a firehouse and a grain operation. I clicked my blinker on 3 miles out, left it running, started drifting right like I was preparing to exit. The truck drifted right too. I held the drift for another mile, then I cut back left and accelerated. The truck moved left and accelerated. I went cold. Not afraid the way people use it for drama, cold the way your body just decides to stop feeling warm. My hands were still on the wheel, my eyes were on the road, but something in me had gone very still and very alert at the same time. I was aware of how loud the rig sounded suddenly. The engine, the whine of tires on cold asphalt, the vibration in the seat under me. I was aware of the dark on both sides of the road, how complete it was, how far the nearest exit was behind me. I pressed the CB button and told the other driver what had just happened. He didn't hesitate. Don't stop, don't pull over, where's your next plaza? I checked my atlas, Sidling Hill Service Plaza, about 14 miles. Go there, he said, don't use the fuel lanes at the edge, pull into the main lot, park close to the building. I told him I would. I drove those 14 miles watching the mirror every 30 seconds. The lights never wavered. When I pushed to 74, they pushed too. When I backed off, they backed off. There was no aggression in it, no flashing, no high beaming, no trying to pull alongside. That was the part that bothered me most. It was patient. Most road aggression has a heat to it, something that builds and escalates and burns itself out. This had none of that. It was just steady, calm, like whatever was back there had nowhere else to be. The smell of the load comes through the cab sometimes on long hauls, a faint cold smell like a walk-in refrigerator, that bland chill that clings to the back of your throat. I noticed it in those 14 miles. I noticed small things, the click of the turn signal when I made minor lane adjustments, the way the road curved left and then right through a ridge cut, and the headlights behind me swung with it perfectly, like they knew that road as well as I did. I pulled into Sidling Hill and swung into the main lot. 4 other rigs were parked in the back row. I maneuvered alongside them, killed my running lights, and sat. The pickup came in off the exit ramp. It moved through the fuel lanes, slow. Then it pulled into the far end of the main lot and stopped. Engine running, lights on, just sitting there. I could make out the shape now, older body style. Broad cab, mid-90s Chevy, maybe a CK or a Silverado, hard to say in that light. Dark color, could have been navy or just black. The plaza lighting only reached so far, and whoever was parked at the far end of that lot was sitting right at the boundary where the sodium light went gray and useless. I couldn't read a plate, I couldn't see movement inside the cab. The engine note was low and steady, a faint rumble I could feel more than hear. Exhaust drifted up white in the cold air and dissolved. I called my dispatcher on my cell. His name is Gary. He picked up on the second ring, works a weird overnight schedule. I told him what was happening. He asked if I wanted him to call the state police. I said yes. While we waited, I didn't take my eyes off that truck. It sat there for 4 minutes. I counted them. Gary stayed quiet on the line, just present. 4 minutes is longer than it sounds when you're watching something and it is watching back and neither of you is moving. Then it reversed, turned, went back toward the exit ramp. No hurry, smooth. I watched its taillights go red up the ramp and disappear onto the turnpike heading west. A Pennsylvania state police trooper showed up about 18 minutes later. Young, professional. I told him everything. He took my description of the truck and said he'd radio it forward to units near the Ohio line. He asked if I'd had any recent conflict with anyone, road rage, a dispute at a stop. I said no. He said it might have been nothing, somebody just going the same direction. I didn't argue, but I told him about the fake exit, about how the truck mirrored my drift and corrected when I corrected. He wrote that down. He didn't have a good answer for it. I sat in that plaza for another 40 minutes, drank a bad coffee from the vending machine inside, came out too hot, too thin, tasted mostly of the cup. I talked to 2 other drivers near the building entrance, their breath showing in the cold air. Neither of them had seen the truck. One of them, an older guy in a Carhartt jacket, said the lot had been quiet all night. I believed him. Whatever had been sitting at the far end of that lot hadn't wanted to be noticed by anyone but me. When I finally pulled back onto the turnpike, I pushed it hard. I made the Ohio border in just under an hour. No headlights behind me the whole way. I made my delivery in Columbus by 4:15. The dock crew unloaded me. I signed the paperwork, and I sat in the cab in that parking lot with the heat running and my hands in my lap for a while. I called Gary and asked if the trooper had followed up. Nothing came back. A week later, I was on Channel 19 coming through Ohio and heard a driver mention 76. I keyed up and asked if anyone on the channel had stories about being followed on that stretch. 2 guys came back within 2 minutes. One said a white sedan had sat on him for 30 miles near Breezewood about a month before. The other said he'd seen a dark pickup idling outside a rest area on 76 at 2 in the morning, just sitting there, nobody getting out. Neither of them had ever gotten a plate. I still run that route. I need the work and I can't afford to be soft about a road. But I don't drive it past Somerset after midnight without checking my mirrors every 5 minutes. And if something sits in that mirror through 2 speed changes, I'm not waiting. I'm going somewhere with lights and people, and I'm not leaving until the sun is up. I've never driven that stretch at night without thinking about it. The dispatch note said the neighbor believed the subject was fine, just concerned. If she was fine, I kept asking myself the whole way there, why were we going? My name is Cal, I'm a paramedic. I've been running calls in central Pennsylvania since 2009, out of a station just off Route 322 between Phillipsburg and Clearfield. Rural work, farm accidents, elderly isolates, drunk driving on roads that don't forgive. You build a rhythm after enough years. You learn what a call sounds like before you get there. This one sounded exactly like every other one. My partner that night was Reed, 12-year veteran, calmer than anyone I've ever worked beside. We pulled out in the rig around 7:15 on a November Tuesday, low 30s, heavy overcast sitting on the tree line. Reed drove. I reviewed the notes. The call came in at 7:02. A neighbor named Doris had tried the non-emergency line first, then dialed 911 when nobody called her back. The subject was a 63-year-old woman named Marjorie, lived alone, no listed emergency contacts, possibly diabetic, though Doris admitted she wasn't certain of that either. She said Marjorie had waved from her window every morning for 11 years. That morning, she hadn't. And then that line, the one I kept turning over, neighbor believes subject is fine, just concerned. I read it twice and put the notes down. The address was a single-story ranch house at the end of a gravel lane about a quarter mile off the county road. We almost missed the turn in the dark. White aluminum siding gone gray, the kind of gray that comes from years of no one looking after a place. A detached garage to the left, one of its two doors hanging off its track at an angle. One exterior light above the front door, a bare bulb in a corroded socket. That was the only light we could see from the lane. Reed parked on the gravel. We grabbed our bags. I knocked, called out our names in the service. Nothing. Knocked again, harder. My knuckles stung from the cold. Reed went around to check the side windows. That's when I saw the door. There was a hasp-style sliding bolt on the outside of it, the kind you put on a shed. It was bolted shut, padlocked. A chunky master combination lock, the orange and black packaging still clear in my memory, because I'd know that size anywhere. I stood there and looked at it. People put locks in strange places sometimes. Exterior bolts on screen doors, that kind of thing, but this was the main entry door, a residential front door, and the lock was on the outside. I ran my flashlight along the doorframe. The hasp had been mounted recently. The wood around the screws was bright and clean where the drill had gone in, not weathered like everything else on that door. Not last season, not last year. Whoever installed it had done it recently. The rawness of that pale wood in the flashlight beam is something I still come back to. Reed came around the corner. He looked at the door, then he looked at me. Neither of us said anything. We called it in, dispatch acknowledged, and said law enforcement was already being notified, estimated arrival unknown. Out there on a Tuesday morning, unknown could mean 20 minutes or it could mean an hour. Reed tried the door anyway, solid. He checked the garage. A 1998 Buick LeSabre was parked inside, engine cold. I held my hand near the hood without touching it. No residual warmth at all. That car had been sitting for a while. She hadn't driven anywhere. We went around to the side windows. The first two had heavy curtains drawn, the kind that don't let any light bleed around the edges. I pressed my ear close to the second one and listened. No television, no radio, no sound of movement. The house was quiet in a way that felt deliberate rather than empty. There is a difference after enough years on this job, and I felt it then. The third window toward the rear was a kitchen window. The curtain was open part way. Reed shined his light through. He said, "Cal, come look at this." The kitchen was clean, not lived in clean. Clean the way a model home is clean, nothing on the counters, no dish rack, no mail, no magnets on the refrigerator, no calendar on the wall, no smell I could detect even pressing close, no food smell, no coffee, nothing, just cold and neutral like a room stripped of its habits. A single chair pulled up to the kitchen table, a glass of water placed exactly in the center of that table. That was it, one chair, one glass of water. I pressed my face closer to the glass. The overhead fluorescent light was on, giving everything a flat, clinical quality. I could see down the short hallway toward the living room. I could see the edge of a couch, and on that couch I could see a woman's feet. She was sitting, feet flat on the floor, still. Reed went back to the rig for the bolt cutters. I stayed at the window and watched. She didn't move. I called out through the glass loud enough she would have heard me if she was conscious and oriented. Nothing. Her feet stayed exactly where they were, heels together, toes pointing forward. The posture of someone who had been told how to sit, and had been sitting that way long enough that it stopped being compliance and just became how they existed. I watched her feet the full 3 or 4 minutes. Reed was gone. Reed cut the padlock. It hit the wooden porch boards with a sound that felt too loud for all that quiet. We went in. Marjorie was alive. She was sitting upright on the couch, hands folded in her lap. She was dressed, hair combed. She looked at us when we came in. She didn't speak. The living room had a smell I noticed right away. Stale air, something like the inside of a car that's been lived in. The television was off, nothing near her on the couch. No book, no blanket, just her, sitting in the lamplight with her hands in her lap, looking at us the way someone looks when they've been very still for a very long time. I crouched down in front of her and ran through the basics. She tracked me with her eyes, pupils equal, blood pressure low but not critical, blood sugar fine, no sign of a fall, no obvious injury. When I asked if she knew what day it was, she said Tuesday. When I asked if she knew why we were there, she said, because he called. I asked who called. She looked at me for a long moment, then she looked at the hallway, not the front hallway we'd come through, the other one, the one leading to the back of the house. She said, "He's still here." Reed was behind me. I heard him shift his weight. The back hallway was dark. I could see maybe 4 feet into it from where I was crouching. A closed door at the end, no light underneath it. I kept my eyes on it while I asked Marjorie to tell me what she meant. She just kept looking at that same spot. The house was completely silent. I became aware of the sound of my own breathing. Then I became aware of how carefully I was trying not to make any. I stood up slowly. Reed had already stepped back toward the front door with his radio in his hand. He called it in possible subject in the residence. His voice was steady, but I'd worked with Reed for 6 years. He did not sound the way he usually sounded. We got Marjorie to her feet and walked her outside to the rig. She went without any resistance. She didn't look back at the house once. County sheriff's deputies arrived about 14 minutes later, 2 units. They cleared the house. The back bedroom window was open. That's how he'd left, or that's what they told us. They found the back bedroom arranged the same way as the kitchen, clean, sparse. A folding chair placed in the center of the room, facing the door, nothing else. And in the closet of that back bedroom, they found a padlock identical to the one on the front door, still in its packaging, like it was a spare. I stayed on scene past the end of my shift. Reed did too. We didn't discuss it, we just stayed. Marjorie told the detective that a man had been coming to her house for 3 days. She didn't know him. He'd knocked the first time and she'd answered and he'd walked in. She hadn't called for help because he'd told her not to. She said he was polite. He made her sit in the living room. He sat in the back bedroom. She didn't know what he was doing back there. He brought her the glass of water each morning and set it in the center of the table. He locked the front door from the outside when he left at night, and he unlocked it when he came back in the morning. She didn't know why. She didn't know who he was. She could describe him. White male, 50s, gray jacket, that was all she had. The detective asked her why she'd been waving from her window each morning. She said she hadn't. She said she hadn't been near the windows in 3 days. That meant the waving Doris saw wasn't Marjorie. They ran the description, they canvassed. The county put out a bulletin. I checked in with the lead detective twice over the following 2 weeks. He was thorough and he was frustrated, which is the worst combination in that kind of case. It means the leads are real and they keep going nowhere. They never identified him. Marjorie moved in with a distant cousin in Ohio about 6 weeks later. The detective mentioned it in passing, said she'd sold the house, said she seemed like she was doing okay. He didn't sound convinced. I think about the padlock a lot, not the one on the door, though that's bad enough, the one still in its packaging, the spare, because that means he'd planned for a second door, or he'd planned to be there long enough to need one. I think about the folding chair in the back bedroom, facing the door. Whatever he was doing in that room for 3 days, he wanted to be able to see anyone coming. And I think about Marjorie's hands in her lap, folded, heels together, sitting the same way when we found her as she probably had been sitting for 3 days, not restrained, not bound, just sitting because he'd told her to, and she had. I still run calls, I haven't stopped, but there's a moment walking up to a front door when I see something slightly wrong about it, a scratch near the lock, a gap in a curtain that shouldn't be there, and I stop walking for just a second. I check the door itself before I knock now, just to see which side the hardware is on. Some things you add to your routine and you can't explain why, except that you can. I was 3 miles in when I noticed the man had no pack and no water bottle. My name is Derek. I've been hiking solo for about 12 years. Day hikes, overnighters, the occasional weekend push. I know what people carry on the trail. Even a casual hiker usually has a small hydration pack, a drawstring bag, something. This man had nothing, hands at his sides, just walking. It was a Saturday in early October on a stretch of the Loyalsoak Trail in Sullivan County, Pennsylvania. I'd done that section twice before. Roughly 9 miles out and back, a stream crossing about halfway, a good rock outcrop at the turnaround, nothing technical. I'd parked at the small gravel pull-off on Route 87, signed the log sheet in the wooden box like I always do, and texted my friend Matt the trailhead name and my expected return time. That part matters. I always do that part. First hour was exactly what I needed. Leaves turning that deep orange and yellow in the Pennsylvania hills right before everything goes gray for 6 months. The trail follows a creek and I could hear water the whole time. Low, constant, almost white noise. The air had that early October bite, not cold enough to see your breath, but cold enough to feel it in your sinuses on every inhale. I had my hiking poles, my 28-liter Osprey, an Nalgene lunch, a basic first aid kit. I was relaxed. I was alone, that was the whole point. I'd had a rough few weeks at work and I just needed quiet. I didn't see anyone else for the first 2 miles. Then I heard footsteps behind me and stepped aside to let a guy pass. He didn't pass. He slowed when I slowed and stayed about 30 feet back. I kept moving, so did he. I told myself he was just matching my pace. People do that. The trail sets a natural rhythm. I didn't think much of it. Then I came to a short switchback and glanced back the way you do when the trail bends. He was closer, maybe 20 feet, still no pack. Gray hoodie, dark jeans, work boots, not trail runners, not hiking pants, work boots. He was looking at the ground when I turned, not at the trees, not at the view. The ground, there was something deliberate about it. like he looked up a half second before I turned and dropped his gaze just in time, like he knew the exact moment to stop watching. I picked up my pace, he picked up his. At the next flat stretch, I stopped and pretended to check my phone. He stopped too, about 40 feet back, just stood there, didn't look at his phone, didn't look at the view, he looked at me. The creek was still audible off to the left, but everything else had gone quiet. No birds, I noticed that specifically. The birds had stopped. I gave him a nod and said, "Hey." He said, "What's your name?" Not hi, not nice day, your name, first thing out of his mouth. I told him a fake one, I said I was Scott. Then he asked, "Where's your car parked?" Something shifted in my chest. It wasn't panic yet. It was more like realizing you left the stove on. A cold, sinking wrongness. My mouth went dry. I told him I was parked at the upper lot. There's no upper lot on that trailhead. One gravel pull-off, that's it. I said it to see what he'd do. He nodded like he knew exactly where I meant. I turned and kept walking. I didn't run. I tried to keep my breathing steady. I was thinking about the distance back to my truck, 3 miles, and how the next mile had no intersecting trails. No way off the ridge without bushwhacking down a steep slope through dense, second-growth timber. Even off-trail, I'd be loud, I'd be slow, and I'd be giving up the one thing I had going for me. A clear path I knew, and he presumably didn't. I pulled out my phone and typed a text to Matt. Weird guy following me, staying calm. No signal, 1 bar, message not sent. I kept walking. The trail was narrow enough that brush on either side occasionally scraped my jacket sleeve. Nowhere to step without stepping into chest-high growth. I was aware of every sound my boots made on the dirt, every snap of a twig, and behind me, 20 to 25 feet back, I could hear his work boots. A flat, heavy sound, the wrong rhythm for hiking, not the rolling heel-to-toe of someone who does this regularly. A full-footed, deliberate plod. The sound of someone walking to close a distance, not to cover a trail. About a quarter mile later, I came around a long bend and stopped cold. There was a second person standing in the tree line about 50 yards ahead on the left, not on the trail, in the woods, just standing still between 2 oaks facing the trail. A bigger man, also no pack, dark canvas work coat, arms loose at his sides, not leaning against anything, not looking at his phone, not doing anything a person does when they've stopped to rest. He was just there. He didn't move when I appeared. He just watched. The gap between the 2 oaks framed him almost perfectly. I don't know if that was intentional. I think about it sometimes. I turned around. The first man was right there, closer than I expected, maybe 15 feet. I said I forgot something at my car, and I was heading back. He said, "There's a waterfall up ahead. You should see it first." I've done that trail twice. There is no waterfall. That was the moment, that quiet sentence delivered completely flat, like he was reading it off a sign. He knew I knew the trail. He wanted me to know he was lying, and he didn't care. It was almost gentle. That was the worst part of it, not aggression, not a threat, just a calm, unhurried confidence that told me he'd done this before and it had gone fine for him. My body understood before my brain finished processing. My stomach dropped, my hands went cold inside my gloves. I gripped both poles, the kind with tungsten carbide tips, and I was aware of them in a way I hadn't been all morning. I said, "I'm good, thanks," and I turned and I walked fast. He fell in behind me. I didn't run, not because I wasn't scared, but because I needed to think. If I ran and he ran, I had 9 miles of adrenaline against a man in work boots. I could sprint maybe a quarter mile before I started slowing down. He might last longer. I also didn't know where the second man had gone. If he'd moved up the trail ahead of me while I was turned around, running was the worst thing I could do. I kept walking fast and glanced back every 30 seconds. He was keeping pace about 20 feet back, not trying to close the gap. That almost made it worse. He wasn't rushing. He had time. The creek was audible again somewhere below on my right. The wind had picked up enough to move the canopy. Leaves came down in slow spirals. It was a beautiful day. That was an obscene thing to notice. I noticed it anyway. I was about 1.5 miles from the trailhead when I heard someone coming up toward me. Trail runners, fast, light footsteps before I even saw her. A woman in a bright red jacket came around the bend, earbuds in, moving at a good clip. I stepped into her path. She pulled an earbud out, startled. I said, "I'm sorry, can I walk out with you? I've got a situation behind me." She looked past me. I looked back. The man had stopped, standing in the middle of the trail, hands at his sides, watching us. Not moving, just watching the way you watch something you've decided to be patient about. She didn't ask a lot of questions. She said, "Yes, let's go." We walked fast and then faster. I checked behind us twice. The man did not follow. He stood there until the trail bent and I couldn't see him anymore. I don't know how long he stayed after that. The woman's name was Carol. She let me talk while we walked. I kept it short. Wrong guy, no gear, following me, second figure in the trees. She'd hiked that trail a dozen times, said she'd seen no one else going up that day. We made it to the trailhead. My truck, a 2018 Tacoma, was the only vehicle in the pull-off. No other cars. Nobody had driven in to hike. That meant they'd either parked somewhere else and walked in, or they'd been out there for a different reason entirely. I drove straight to the Sullivan County Ranger Station off Route 154. I told them everything: the gray hoodie, the jeans, the work boots, the second figure in the trees, the canvas coat, the waterfall line, the questions about my name and my car. The ranger who took my report was quiet for a moment. Then he told me they'd had 2 other complaints from that same stretch of trail in the last month, both solo hikers. Both reported a man with no pack who asked where they were parked. Neither had seen a second person in the trees. I believed them anyway. He probably stayed back when there were 2 of you, less chance of it sticking in the report. The ranger said they'd patrol that section. He took my number. 6 months later in the spring, I saw a short piece in the local Sullivan County paper online. 2 men had been arrested about 40 miles north near a different trailhead in Tioga County. I won't go into every detail. The charges were serious, and the way they worked matched exactly what I'd described: identifying isolated hikers, learning vehicle locations, working in pairs. I called Matt after I read that, told him the whole thing for the first time, start to finish. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Derek, that was the text, the one that didn't send." He'd found it sitting unsent in my phone when I handed it to him after I got back that day. He'd thought I was messing with him. He'd deleted it and never said anything. I think about Carol in the red jacket a lot. I've never been able to find her to say thank you. I looked. She just had the right pace on the right trail at the right moment. I hike solo again now, not that section, not that county. And when I text my route before I leave, I wait for the confirmation to come back before I pull out of the parking lot. Every time.